Today we have a Penn International 6 conventional reel that we're going to break down and put back together with some tweaks. This one has already been cleaned and all the adjustments that I needed to make to it have already been done. And I'll give you some tips and tricks along the way as well. On this reel, I actually leave the handle on for a sec and work on the left side plate. And that's because one reason is because if I remove the handle, I can pop the main gear down and disengage and obviously, excuse me, and in turn lower the ratchet and then disengage the dog. So what I'm trying to do is I want to try to open this up so you can see where the dog sits. It may or may not work, but we'll see. So let's start with the left side plate. These screws are different sizes, so just take note of the screws when you pull them out. There are shorter screws for the reel seat. And as you can see, the bearing came out. The bearing sits right there. I'm pulling off the clutch washers and a couple of shims that I added, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why now. This drag cover, or the drag plate, excuse me, rests on top of the drag cover, or sits inside the drag cover, and it'll brush across it, so it effectively reduces the amount of free spool you can have. So I added those shims to just slightly lower the drag plate so that it spins more freely. These reels were notorious for having poor free spool, so it was a lot worse than it was before I added the shims to the top of the pinion. I think I'll go ahead and remove this drag cover now. These screws are pretty small, so gotta be a little careful with these things. And if you're wondering why I'm not wearing any gloves, it's because I cleaned the reel already, so there's not a lot of grease or gunk on there. This reel has the asbestos drag, so it's not been upgraded. And we're leaving it as that. Out comes the drag plate, or the pressure plate. Here's the asbestos drag. There is a spring inside that's kept in place by 2 retaining washers. That washer inside does come out, but I'll leave it in there. If it falls out, then we'll just put it back in. This metal washer plate is glued in here, and it was glued in here when I got the reel, but I had to pop it out because I wanted to clean inside. When you pop it out, you have to use some heat usually to get this plate out, because you have to loosen the glue underneath. I then removed the glue that was underneath here, the old glue, and used some new glue to reset the plate. If you don't glue the plate back in, it'll float. And what happens when it floats is it'll affect the drag washer on this, and it'll effectively kind of push up against it when you're in free spool, when you're cranking, anything that has to do with the reel spinning. You'll hear noise from it. It needs to be glued in, so don't skip that step. Let's go ahead and remove the the click assembly. I remove the ring first. Just kind of rock it back and forth. Sometimes it comes out, sometimes you got to be a little more aggressive with it. Then we'll go ahead and remove this C-clip or the E-clip from the click tongue. I like to either push down so it doesn't pop too far if it's going to pop out. Then remove it. There's a washer that sits, a Teflon washer that sits on the outside of the plate. Okay, so I don't know if you can see this or not, but there's a dog sitting there, and it goes up and down to engage. The ratchet or the anti-reverse mechanism. I didn't want to miss that, or I didn't want to pop the ratchet from underneath up too high and pop or disengage this. But now we have to do it anyhow, so at least you've seen it. You know where it goes, you know where it sits. Removing the set screw. Let's see if I can hand loosen this. Yeah, I can. Underneath here there's a washer, little Teflon spacing or spacer that has to be put back in. When I'm done with this, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and service the reel by just greasing it and oiling it and then putting it back together. Next I'll go with the beauty ring, removing the beauty ring and then removing the lever. These screws are pretty long. I try to keep the beauty ring screws separate from everything else. On this one, well, on most internationals that I do, but on this one you don't really need to because it's so obvious. But out of habit, I still kind of separate them. The reason you heard that pop is because the spring and the pressure plate or pressure mechanism for this for the lever is still engaged. I'll show you what that looks like. It consists of this spring that sits inside the screw and a separate another spring, larger spring that sits on the outside that rests inside there. And it looks kind of like that. All right, so to remove this lever, you also want to make sure the spools, the tension is all the way open when you're working on this. I just popped the I just popped the ratchet above the dog, so it slipped. You back it up and just feel for the groove that it sits in. Let's go ahead and remove these spacers that were for the beauty ring. Excuse me, not the beauty ring, but for the ring that the lever sits on. It's called a quadrant ring. Find the groove, slip it up, comes off like that. We'll break that down. You'll see the bearing sitting on the inside there. I'll keep this separate as well because this bearing was bad, so I had to replace it with a new one. This is the good bearing, but I don't want to switch the left side bearing for the right side bearing. Let's go to remove this sleeve here. Again, as I said, note the size of the screws because they are different. Now we're going to remove this screw that's holding the main gear in place. Pull this stand down, get that out. There's a ratchet. The way the ratchet works is sits just like that. That's that. Pull this post out. There's another Teflon washer that sits on top of the post. That sits inside that groove right there. These just slip off. They kind of just, they're keyed, so they only fit in one position or one setting. Of course, you can reverse it, so you have to be careful when you're replacing the ratchet. We'll leave this in place for now. We're going to remove the rest of these screws. This post actually screws out. It just sits inside the right side plate like that. Alright, so let's get this dog out. This is the dog cover. And on some of these, the screws are larger than on others. Some you'll have screws where it looks like this, with a smaller head. They're all the same as long as they fit. Just make sure you take note of what screw came from where. And like most reels, it's not that difficult to work on, but you have to kind of know. Under this stand or this cover, there's two spacers, two brass spacers that sit on the back side, right there. And note the dog is facing, note the way the dog is facing. To remove this dog, you have to remove an E-clip that's right there. And to get it back in place is kind of a nightmare. If you look at this dog, or you notice this dog is bent slightly upwards in the middle, this is to help protect the dog from slipping under it when it's engaged or when it's set. Let's make sure we didn't miss anything over here. And let's go to the lever. Now for the lever, to remove that E-clip, I like to tighten the preset knob all the way and then back it up a little bit to create a little bit of space so I can pull that E-clip out. And it just lifts right up. These are magnetized tips, so they kind of just stick to the screws, to the screwdriver. And it just pops off. I'll show you how it looks, or how it should be set when I take it off. Okay, so there's a spring here on the knob that sits inside of it. This goes next, and then this after it, and that's where the E-clip sits in place. There's a little groove right there, so if you can see that. And that's pretty much it for breaking down a Penn International 6. I'll be right back to put it together and lube and oil it. Okay, we're back. Let's go to start reassembling the Penn International 6. For this one, I think I'll start with the lever mechanism. I like to try to get these E-clips out of the way so I don't lose any of them. Alright, so we'll screw in the lever, I'm sorry, the tension knob. Then we'll set everything else in place. Again, I go all the way in, so I have as much space as possible to work with. Then I'll drop this bearing on there, add a tiny bit of oil to this. Let it work its way in there when it's engaged. Now I'll back it up slightly so I have a little bit of room or a little bit of play so I can get this E-clip in there. Pop it in, use the tip of a screwdriver and just lever it in there. And that's it for that. And before I forget, I'll back it up the entire way for when I go to reinstall it. We'll do the left side plate next, which is a click assembly, and the bearing. Where's my screw? Here, my knob, and the click tongue. I'll go ahead and line this with a little bit of grease. Same for here. I'll do the entire plate. Yes, there's a little bit of corrosion there that I cleaned up. Alright, as much grease as I want to put on there has been added. You don't need a lot, you just need to lightly coat it. And the first thing I do is put this knob in. So I'll put the Teflon washer back on. Set the tongue in place. And then pop the C-clip on, or the E-clip on. Just rest it on top of the click tongue, position it for the groove, and just pop it in. It's almost there. Let's go all the way up to the top and pop it in like that. Then I'll put the ring in. I will grease this as well. Let's open it up to pop it over the click tongue. Then screw it in place. Just go ahead and stick the bearing back in and set it to the side. Next we'll do the spool assembly. It's with the drag and the cover and all that good stuff. These are the basic components for the for the drag assembly. Go ahead and pop the washer in. Spring goes in. The orientation of this Teflon piece is facing this way, down. So it rests inside the spring. On with that. And I'll grease this, even though I've added this, the shims, I'll still lightly grease this. Then I'll grease the inside of this plate. Then just rest it on there. Find the holes, line them up, and add your screws. Now if you notice, I haven't tightened any of these screws on all the way yet, and that's so I don't lock it in place and not be able to get one of the screws in. But when they're all in, I'll go ahead and lock these screws down. And I go across, and then back, across, and across. Now we can take this time to go ahead and grease pinion up. And I won't set these on yet, just in case they fall off. So I'll wait till I put this inside. I'll wait till I'm ready to put this in before adding the shims and the clutch washers. For the clutch washers, I will grease them, and just lightly. I'll just use the grease that's on my fingers already. Let's get to the right side plate. Let's go ahead and put the Teflon washer on the post, so we know it's there. And we're going to work on getting this, the spring, the dog spring, in. It goes on this post right here. There's a tiny little groove that the E-clip sits in just above it. And I would probably be better off pausing the video instead of showing you how to put that in, because there's no real way of doing it. And if you know a better way, by all means let me know. I use my fingers, I use everything. I think we might have gotten lucky here. We did not. Yeah, we did. It's not always that easy. So note that the prong, or the raised end of the spring, goes on the outside or away from the casing. Let's go ahead and grease this all up. Okay, so now that that's in place, what we'll do is, that's what I did. I missed the dog. No, I didn't miss the dog. I take that back. We'll go ahead and set the dog in place, and it sits. I'm just adding some grease to it. It sits this direction, like that. You have to put this in first, because if you don't, you can't get the ratchet and main gear in. And if it's on this side of it, you actually have to lift it all out again to get it to move over. That might happen this time as well, but it should be in place first. So let's see if we can get this to work in one shot. I'll hold that to the side just to get the ratchet in. Get the ratchets in place. I'll leave that like that for now and then lock it back in place in a sec. Again, like I told you with this, you want it sitting in this orientation here where it doesn't block the gap. Just kind of loosely put those over the hole. Drop it in place. Then stick your screws in if it's lined up, which it looks pretty good. And screw them in. All right, let's go back to this main gear. Okay, that's set in place. Then we'll go ahead and get this spring loaded back to the other side. And we'll move it so we can get the ratchet set and have this sitting properly. Okay, so now we can put the post or the cover, the sleeve on here. Just gonna make sure this works properly. That goes on like that. And throughout this process, when we're putting everything back together, we might pop that ratchet off the dog. But it's not that difficult to put back in. Just gotta use a small screwdriver and just kind of flick it back into place. So like I said before, to fix that, simply take a small screwdriver, flick the dog up and drop the assembly back in place, and then you're back in business. Let's go ahead and get the different pieces added to the left side plate. I'll start with the middle one, trying to kind of get these set in place, and then I just move on. The beauty of doing it this way is that you can always tell where the nameplate is supposed to go. And it'll go like this, which is opposite the reel stand. And these take the long screws, and that post will take that little shorter screw that's in there, that extra one. Basically whatever it came with is what you just put back in. Sometimes Penn would run out of stuff like any other company and have to substitute. So, which is the reason you'll see that these screws here can be different on some Internationals. Let's get this other post in. And I won't put in the single post. I'll put that in on the right side first. I'm not tightening these down yet until the reel is complete. Or near complete. Okay, let me go and get the handle on there because I don't want this to keep slipping on me. Don't forget your little sleeve that goes just below it. And I'm holding the main gear in, or the assembly in, with my finger so it doesn't slip up on me again. Okay, let's set that. And it doesn't need to be extremely tight yet. Just needs to be there so that this doesn't back in and out. Let's go ahead and get this reel assembled. I'm going to grease the inside of this right here. This is where the bearing sits. And we'll leave that out for now. We can stick it in through that side, so that it rests on top of the pinion gear. Oh, that's nice. That's real nice. All right, let's go ahead and set the clutch washers on there with the with the two shims. For this one, I only added two. And these go in a concave to concave position. So it's like it's supposed to look like a flying saucer at the end. Just making sure there's nothing missing here. There is one thing I need to tighten this down. Okay, that's good. So I'll set the spool into the left side first. And let me go ahead and oil that bearing. Just working the grease into the oil into the bearing. Okay, and we'll try it this way. I just don't want it to slip out. We'll put the bearing inside. Just pop it in there like that, and it should just slip right in. Like that. We'll go ahead and get this set. Again, don't forget the smaller screws go on the bottom or on the reel stand. The shorter screws do. Not too tight because we're going to stick this post in here. Then we'll get the rest of the screws in place and attach the quadrant ring. And a couple of these screws we're going to tighten down because we won't be able to access them once we put the quadrant ring on. But the rest we'll leave fairly loose until the end. And the one remaining screw you see there is for the post that screws in to the into the right side. Then we can go over here and put this post screw in. Then we can now tighten down the left side plate. Functioning reel there. Okay, so now we'll put the lever on. You just gotta kind of feel for the groove. Oh, excuse me, I take that back. We're gonna tighten these two screws here because we won't be able to access them when we put the quadrant ring on. Then we'll just find the groove that it sits into. It'll just drop in there. Should be somewhere around there. And again, don't forget to have this opened, all the tension knob opened all the way up. To slide the quadrant ring into the groove or the slot on the lever, I put the center screw in first. Loosely, so that I can put these posts in. The one I like to do is the one closer to the knob and free spool because there's more room left for this one over here. Just press them on top of each other, slot the screws through. Just get them going so that they don't fall out of place. I know I'm blocking the camera for this one. Apologies. Then we'll go ahead and set in this knob, or the screw into the knob. And for this, you just kind of fit it into the hole there. Start it with your fingers, then finish it up with a screwdriver. Then go ahead and tighten the rest of the screws down. And that's basically it. What's left is a set screw that goes inside here, and you are good to go. This is an improvement on the free spool, believe it or not. Crazy. But they were meant for trolling. World records. You can tighten it down. You still see we have free spool, which is good. We obviously have less and less as we get tighter. But those shims really do help. That's where we lose free spool. All right, thanks for watching, guys.